first of all, I'd like to thank both Mary and Jeff most heartily for all the work that they've put into organizing this splendid conference. So the title of my talk is The Human Body, Last Bastion of Earthly Wilderness. Mary and Jeff asked me to talk a bit about my book, The Light Green Society, as it hits its 10th birthday, but also to discuss the links between that project and the current book, which is titled Superhuman Civilization, Justice and Identity in a Bioengineered Society. This book that is Superhuman Civilization is one that I've just finished after 11 years of working on it. One of the more depressing conclusions I was forced to reach through the research and writing of The Light Green Society concerned a phenomenon that I call the artificialization of the planet. I had been keenly aware before writing my book that spaces of pristine wilderness had been steadily retreating over past centuries under the onslaught of the Industrial Revolution, the rising tide of human activities throughout the world. Nevertheless, the realization only dawned on me during the final stages of writing this book that this process of rampant artificialization had not been slowed down at all by the advent of green ideas in the decades following the 1960s. Au contraire, the majority of environmentalist actions on behalf of saving nature actually required an intensification of human intervention in the territory. Even the most optimistic future scenarios in which the Greens succeeded in realizing many of their goals would unavoidably carry modern society toward what I call the managed planet. The most we could hope for was a tame, well-tended earthly garden with a few spots of primeval wilderness here and there, fenced off from human activity, special places that we could observe from the outside, like museum dioramas depicting a bygone world of nature untouched by human hands. The process of planetary artificialization, in other words, could end up yielding an outcome that was either ecologically destructive or ecologically benign. That choice was indeed up to humankind. But the phenomenon itself of ever-growing artificialization was not a matter of choice. It was inevitable. The only future scenarios I could imagine in which the intensity of human artifice might significantly decline were catastrophic ones: pandemic, nuclear war, meteorite cataclysm, scenarios in which our civilization got flung back to a cave-dwelling, pre-industrial mode. Now, I have to admit, I didn't like reaching this conclusion about inexorable artificialization. It struck me as a major bummer. So, in the 10 years since The Light Green Society was published, I've tried and tried to find my way to a different set of assumptions and inferences about our planetary future. That effort has been a failure. Indeed, I've gradually come to an even more disturbing conclusion. Our society today is in the process of breaching the last remaining barrier, the last piece of earthly territory that had remained relatively untouched by our desire for mastery and control. This last bit of territory is the human body, and especially the human brain. Throughout history, the identity of each individual human has been shaped by four main kinds of factors: rearing, genetic inheritance, social milieu, as well as the choices made by each person in sculpting his or her own selfhood over a lifetime. A strong element of givenness has pervaded this story. We find ourselves, each of us, born into a specific family in a particular society at a distinct moment in time. We have no choice in the matter. As we grow up, we discover our innate talents and propensities, as well as our foibles and weaknesses. And here again, our range of control is rather narrow. No one really chooses to be, for example, gifted in mathematical reasoning and physically frail, tone deaf, irascible, whatever. It's simply the hand we are dealt. But all this has begun to change over the past couple of centuries. Humans have begun to use science, technology, and medicine to take control increasingly over their own biological destiny. The process has accelerated greatly in the decades since World War II. And my argument today is that it appears set to accelerate even more in the decades to come. The great transformation we are embarking on as the 21st century begins has to do with applying technology to the human body and mind in order to boost or alter our performance profile. We are applying our technological ingenuity to the challenge of redesigning ourselves, reconfiguring our own physical and mental capabilities. The technologies of human biological enhancement fall into three main areas: drugs, bioelectronics, and genetics. Through the use of advanced pharmaceuticals, we are learning how to control our moods, sculpt our personality, boost our physical and mental performance, increase our longevity and vitality. Through the application of prostheses, implants, and other bioelectronic devices, we are not only healing the blind and paralyzed, but beginning to reshape our bodies, enhance our memories, and generate entirely new ways of interacting with machines. Today, for example, if you put on a skull cap that reads the electromagnetic activity in your brain, you can sit down in front of a computer, and after 30 minutes of practice, you will be able to play a video game controlling the computer cursor by thought alone. Finally, the third category, through genetic interventions, we're not only neutralizing certain diseases long thought incurable, but opening up the very real possibility of taking evolution into our own hands, partially designing our offspring before they are born, reconfiguring the human platform of body and mind in a thoroughgoing way. Now, it's certainly true that we humans have already been modifying our bodies and minds for millennia. We wear glasses, we adorn ourselves with earrings, we brew coffee or alcohol to modulate the state of our consciousness. But what's coming over the horizon today is qualitatively different. All these natural artificial hybrids, drugs, bioelectronics, genetics, they all have one feature in common. They illustrate the directness and sheer potency with which humans can now manipulate the innermost workings of nature's processes, including those processes taking place within our own organism. Here lies a major factor distinguishing our era from those that came before. At this point, you may be thinking, well, yes, perhaps, but what does all this have to do specifically with France? My answer is that it's relevant to French history in the same way that the Industrial Revolution became relevant to France, and that the rise of environmentalist ideas proved relevant to France. French scientists and technologists are at the forefront of the research and engineering that are propelling the biotech revolution. And French men and women, by virtue of being citizens of a leading industrial democracy, will be among the first to feel the impact of this transformative process as it unfolds over the coming decades. France, in short, is about to be hit by a tidal wave of social, economic, and cultural change associated with human applications of biotechnology. This biotech tsunami is global in scope, but it will play out in the French context in unique ways that reflect the nation's distinctive history, traditions, and institutions. Let me just describe for you some of the most salient ways in which human biological enhancement seems likely to challenge or even destabilize the social order of a country like France. I'll do this by posing a series of questions clustered by theme. Will the most potent and effective enhancements be prohibitively expensive and therefore remain accessible only to the privileged few, like Gérard Depardieu? And if so, would this not result in a radical exacerbation of the division between the haves and the have-nots, inscribing that division in biology itself? On what side would stand those persons whose wealth allows them to modify their own trait profiles and the trait profiles of their children by using the most potent and advanced enhancement technologies? On the other side would stand those for whom these technologies remain out of reach, those whose offspring are condemned to fall ever farther behind in the competition for resources and power. Will these technologies continually raise the bar of quote-unquote normal performance, forcing people to engage in constant cycles of upgrades and boosts merely to keep up with the ever-rising benchmarks of species-typical capability? What happens to those who refuse such enhancements? Will they become akin to obsolete technologies, hopelessly outclassed by modified humans in health, talent, dexterity, mental acuity, the ability to communicate, the ability to interact with machines? Will such unmodified humans be able to coexist alongside the modified ones? Might one expect significantly higher levels of prejudice to plague society? In the past, discrimination has primarily been based on relatively superficial attributes of individuals, such as their physical appearance, black versus white, or their membership in an ethnically demarcated group, Jew versus German Christian. How much more potent the impulses of stereotyping, resentment, and hatred would be in a world where individuals and perhaps entire groups truly did differ increasingly from each other in their particular profiles of strength, health, talent, appearance, or mental acuity. What would be the practical and psychological consequences of extremely long lifespans and health spans in the coming generations? If the peak vitality of individuals could be extended for a much greater period than at present, say double to 160 years, what impact would this have on the family, on marriage, on work, on population levels and ecological sustainability? As scientists find increasingly sophisticated ways to intervene directly in the brain-mind process of humans, whether through neuroceuticals or bioelectronic means, what impact will this have on individuality, on privacy, on the autonomy of our decision-making? What will it be like to sit down with your spouse or significant other to lay out the genetic design parameters of your offspring? What about if you and your spouse cannot agree? Do you compromise by swapping one trait against another? Or perhaps by allowing one spouse priority in shaping the traits of one child, while allowing the other spouse to have a say in shaping the next kid? What effect would this subsequently have on family dynamics? And what would it be like, conversely, to know that your parents had sat down for that little planning session in the months before you were conceived? Would you resent them for providing you with traits you ended up disliking in yourself? Would you wonder over time if your achievements really belonged to you or were merely products of the engineering carried out on you by someone else before you were born? In a culture rife with enhancement packages available for sale on the free market, how will we avoid a gradual commodification of humans, the instrumentalization of human traits, faculties, and mental functions? The tendency will be strong for people to speak casually about getting an upgrade, choosing a better model. This is the kind of thinking that inherently dehumanizes people, distances them from each other, degrades their sense of each other's fundamental worth. I trust you will readily see from these clusters of questions that the application of biotechnology to humans will profoundly affect many of the topics that we historians consider to be our professional bread and butter. Social and economic inequality, cultural identity, prejudice and violence, marriage and the family, the public and private spheres, technological determinism, and the governance of medical and scientific innovation. Still, at this point you may be thinking, well, yes, perhaps, but this all seems to have a lot more to do with the future than the past. Are we historians even qualified to deal in a professional and rigorous manner with these kinds of issues? Well, this is a very sensible question, to which I'll respond with another question. When it comes to thinking about the possible shape of the next 100 years, is there anybody more qualified than a historian? I don't really think so. All humans suffer equally from major epistemological handicaps when it comes to envisioning the future. The variables are too great, the complex interactions of contingency and causality too hard to project. But as historians, we are trained specifically to grapple with tangled sequences of past causal processes, figuring out how they ultimately led to one particular outcome rather than another. I would claim that the eclectic conceptual toolkit of our discipline equips us particularly well to draw dotted lines of possibility into the future. Both humility and common sense dictate that we should never attempt to predict specific outcomes 50 years away, but we can gain a better sense of what lies ahead if we set forth a range of plausible scenarios and seek to envision how they each play out. This approach obviously yields a less reliable and rigorous form of knowledge than our studies of the past, yet it's a lot better than nothing at all. Thinking about possible futures compels us to clarify our current priorities, explicitly deciding which values we wish to see prevailing during the decades to come. So, to sum up, the theme of this conference is nature and technology. I have argued that the human biological organism falls under the category of nature, as much as any river or forest, and that it too, like the myriad natural spaces that surround us, is starting to feel the pressure of artificialization. This process is just beginning, the artificialization of the human. If I tried to capture it through a visual metaphor, I would say it's analogous to the rural landscape of France in the mid-1800s, when the first tangible signs of industrialization were making themselves felt here and there throughout the territory: trains, factories, smoking chimneys. I believe the familiar landscape of the human body and mind is poised to undergo a similarly wrenching transformation at the hands of technology over the century to come. Humankind will need to develop a new ecology and a new ethics to deal with it.